How's it going, ladies and Bruce? Up over Sixkilla. Welcome back to the Divine Deception. I believe we are playing as the murderer now, or at least the accomplice of the murderer who killed the government official in the investigative section when we were playing as the investigator. Because we're at that gala again, and the one who was murdered is still alive, and we're playing as a dodgy-ass waiter. Let's carry on, shall we? As I began approaching, I held the tray with the wine glasses closer to my body. I couldn't make this a major incident. It needs to be nothing more than a minor hiccup. Closer, closer. As I got right next to him, I carefully tripped over Mr. Athens' foot. With a deft hand, I directed the spilling glass right at the side of his coat. The whole thing panned out perfectly. Most importantly, Polly's freakout was drawing everyone's attention. The following interaction would be between Mr. Athens and myself. Excellent. As soon as the old man realised what had happened, his face turned into a scowl. I say, is this the type of service I should expect? I'm so sorry, sir. Please let me help you out. I would think so. Honestly, I was surprised at how tame his response was. I thought he'd be an even larger dick. So, I need to play the panicked, nervous waiter. I placed the tray on a nearby empty table. Then I took out a rag and began drying up the spill on Mr. Athens. Some people would probably bristle at this gesture. They'd think it too much. But not Mr. Athens. To him it made sense that someone would fix their mess. That someone else would clean him up. Was it a little too much to bank on his arrogance? Maybe. But I had a backup. This is just the best case outcome. Because as I was drying him off, it was a perfect opportunity to plant it. The suit Mr. Athens was wearing had a big, obvious front pocket. It was practically begging me to slip something there. And sure enough, I slipped my prepared rag into the pocket. He probably noticed it before too long. The plan was that he wouldn't have too long to notice it. But the rag was just the opening volley. The real key of this act was the ice cube. Mr. Athens wouldn't be distracted for too long, but the old coot was well past his prime. He wasn't the attentive type. A real magician would have an absolute field day with him. And so, this next move took very little effort. I palmed the ice cube that had been slowly melting in my pocket. Honestly, I'm surprised it was still mostly intact. When preparing it in the bathroom, I was worried that it would melt very quickly. I guess ice keeps its form a lot longer than I expected. Very subtly, I placed it in the glass of wine Mr. Athens was drinking from. When I knocked into him, he had very reasonably placed it on the table, placed it in a prime position for me to drop the poisoned ice cube. I didn't even look at the glass, I just maintained eye contact. Made sure Mr. Athens didn't notice. He didn't, and just like that, the old man's fate was sealed. Sometimes when I did my job, I felt the need to apologise. Not to the person themselves, but just to somebody. Looking at the man's face, however, I didn't waver for a moment. He brought this on himself. He dreamed bigger than he should have. Fought nastier than he should have. This man had a very simple, very basic job. Even I couldn't fuck it up. But for whatever reason, Athens just couldn't do the bare minimum. He strove for more than what he had at all. It's something the universe always tends to punish. 33, 32, 31. Again, so sorry. I bowed and began to put some distance between the two of us. However, before I got too far, I took one last item out of my pocket. A crumpled up page of the Bible. It highlighted a specific verse from the book of Psalms. What I highlighted didn't really matter, it just felt like something fittingly ominous. The page itself, however, carried quite a lot of meaning. When I first read Cock Robin, I was sort of stunned. I didn't particularly like the poem. Much the opposite, it sounded like complete nonsense. I'd read it 4 times, but I still didn't understand it. I didn't understand a lot of poems. They tend to be too abstract, and they'd often go above my head. So I tried looking up the meaning online, hoping someone on the internet would know what the hell the poem was talking about. Turns out the internet was just as torn as I was. Some guy said it was trying to talk about the fall of some British dude called Robert Walpole. Robin. Someone else said it was a parody of the death of King William II. He got killed by an arrow, I guess. Or maybe it was the telling of the story of the murder of the Norse god Baldur. Or perhaps the death of the Celtic god Lugh. Through theory after theory, each as threadbare as the last. I came away from the poem thinking it was really completely meaningless. That I was only recommended it because it was a clear, methodical list of distinctive things. Well, fair enough. The poem might not have meaning now, but that just meant that I'd be the one to give it meaning. The note was right by the base of the table. That was close enough. Now I could make my escape. I took 3 steps away from Mr. Athens, and then a thought crossed my head. I turned back to the old man. Before I knew what I was doing, I spoke. Enjoy the party. After all, you never know if it'll be your last. Party, that is. The last party you attend, to be specific. Without a further moment of clarification, I immediately turned away before I could see the old man's reaction, incredibly embarrassed. Add a bit more pizzazz. Add a bit more pizzazz my ass. How the hell was I supposed to make things any better? Whatever. Job complete. 21, 20, 19. I need to get out of here. I made my way to the exit. There was nobody in my way. Look casual. Look casual. By the entrance, one of the waiters that was logging people in the guest list was standing casually. That's expected. That's good, honestly. But I might pose a teeny bit of an issue. No. That's only if I let it. I just decided to walk by him. Just gave him a solid nod. It was a matter of confidence. If I just walked out like I was meant to. Hey man, where are you going? Shit. Just, smoke break. Ah, alright, cool. Oh, thank God. I thought it was going to be a bigger issue. I opened the door, walked through, and like that I'd fled the premises. I was out of the building now, so counting was irrelevant. Still, it was good practice to see how accurate I was. I'd given myself 10 seconds of wiggle room. That's about how close I could cut it before risking that the target would collapse before the lights went out. And that was the absolute worst case scenario. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. I heard some shouting. Ah, that must have been it then. People were panicking because the lights went out unexpectedly. That made sense. That was the sort of emotional reaction I could track. Well, hold on. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Maybe that old kook collapsed early. Maybe that's what the shouting was in reference to. To double check, I decided to look under the door. Sure enough, I didn't see any light coming out of it. Great. Things had gone really well. But I couldn't just zone out now. I need to remember I was still a few feet away from a dead body. I'd be powerless, useless if I was in jail. I couldn't let that happen. So now, time to clean up loose ends. Wait, no. That made it sound like I was just beginning to clean up loose ends. That's what this whole thing was about. It was best to keep moving now, while adrenaline was working in my favour. Obviously, my first instinct was to try and put as much distance between this building and myself as possible. Part of being a professional was to ignore these first instincts. I could flee before removing my little friend in the boiler room. Theoretically, there was nothing about it that could link back to me. Still, its presence would give a lot of the game away. It was worth the risk to go remove it. I sprinted toward the west side of the building, trying to circle the venue. It was really dark out. Even the light on the side of the building was out. Probably my fault. Oh well. I'd done my homework. I could circle this building blindfolded. Before long I was on the other side where I spotted a small open window. Dangling out of it was a nice small rope. I grabbed it, gave it a yank. For a moment I was worried that only the rope would follow. Luckily the crude mechanical device I'd left in the boiler room was successfully fished out of the crime scene. I grabbed it with my hand and briefly admired my handiwork. A lot of people in my position would have connections that could craft things like this for them. I wasn't so lucky. Instead I had to build it myself without much knowledge of how to make something like this. But I had time. I had patience. I had resources. I could do this much by myself. I mean, all I did was fry a simple circuit board. Not much to it. Anyway, now that I retrieved my tool, I didn't want to leave the window open. That was a sure sign of my guilt. The window was a little too high for me to reach without assistance. Luckily, as I said, I'd done my homework. I grabbed a second rope. This one was attached to the back of the window and yanked it down. Sure enough, the window fell to a close. I pulled the rope harder and with some resistance, it detached from the window. There. With a little ingenuity, I'd erased my presence from the scene. Not hard at all. Now, I could get started with that whole escape idea. The fastest way to flee would be with a car down the road. I could be miles away in a matter of minutes. Luckily, I wasn't an amateur. That sort of escape was typical the type police studied. The type that would leave a trace. That would eventually get me caught. I remembered my mission statement, and I did my job right. It was like I was never there. I was just a non-entity, a hypothetical third-party killer with no evidence to prove or disprove me. I turned my lack of a presence into my weapon. So then an escape via car was out. What about my bike? Scooter? What if I just sprinted down the road? That wouldn't work either. Again, it wasn't the car that was the problem, it was the roads. I should take advantage of my strengths. Usually when people think about a killer, they think they've got some life they need to return to. Since I don't have that, I should abuse that. My only goal was to escape detection. Speed wasn't an issue. So they're not the roads, the forest. I made my way into the forest in the direction of the seaside. I knew where I was going, so I began my trek in the dark and the silence. I still felt the need to put as much distance between myself and the crime scene. But again, professionals ignored their instincts. I need to be better. Really, once you got a few feet into the forest, most people wouldn't be able to spot you unless they went into the forest themselves. And that would only happen if they went looking for someone who had left the venue. If things had gone well, that wouldn't be the case. Remember, speed isn't important, avoiding detection is important. I need to make sure I wasn't leaving a trace. Light feet, careful feet. No footsteps, no trail of broken twigs. It was impossible to not alter a thing. It was also impossible to tell light traces of a human apart from the general chaos of the forest floor. I just need to make sure I wasn't overt. Slowly, methodically, blindly, moving forwards. My destination was close, but that was fine. It wasn't close. Speed isn't the issue. Forwards, forwards. My mind drifted to the scene I left. At this point, the police were almost certainly there. Discovering my work. Good. Discover my work. Be misled. Be preoccupied. Search for the killer in the gala, not the forest. Forwards. Step by step. Calmly. Was I going in the right direction? There was only one direction to go. It's not like I could get lost. But did I go to the right direction to begin with? Of course I did. I practiced this. Those nerves were natural. Expected. After all, it had been hours? Hard to tell, but it would be hours before I reached my destination. With that sort of time commitment, I expected that I'd doubt myself. But doubting isn't important. What's important is moving forward. Step by step, not a trace. At this point, this caution was probably unnecessary. If I'd done my job up until now, it's not like I could find my trail in the middle of the forest. But it was the principle of the thing. Why risk it? Even if doing a job worse had a 0% chance of having repercussions, you'd still be doing it worse. And you don't do a worse job if you want to be a winner. After what felt like ages, the tree line finally began to give way. Good, but don't rush to the edge, caught up in the moment, step by step. As I look out, I can see the sea. The moon looked beautiful, reflected upon the rocky waves. But obviously, I'd find the sea if I poked out on this side of the forest. That I reached the place where I was meant to be. I scanned the seaside. There. Found it. A sad little dock without much advertising, without a clear way to get to it, without any big or extravagant boats attached. I wasn't looking for an extravagant boat. I was looking for a small, pitiful boat moored to the pier. And I found it. Before exiting the forest, I quickly scanned the area once more. This time I was on the lookout for witnesses. There's no good reason for someone to be here at this time of night, but I was here, wasn't I? The world was small and there were a lot of people living in it. Fortunately, fate was still on my side. Great. I carefully made my way down to the dock. There, the boat. I didn't even know who owned this thing. Doubt that I'd used it in months. Not that it mattered. I began taking off all the clothes that placed me as a member of the gala. I stuffed it into a little bag I left on the boat, tied the bag, and then tossed it into the ocean. I debated whether it was better to hide these clothes in the ocean or in the middle of the forest. Ultimately, I decided to go with both options, resulting in a near impossible chance of the evidence ever being found. Now they looked just like any other homeless person. So it made sense that I'd lie down on this random boat. It made sense I'd kick my legs out. This is where I was going to spend the night. The next day I made plans for getting back to my residence. Was this a touch excessive? Maybe. But boy, were investigators vicious. They spent days upon days trying to snag the smallest thread you leave dangling for them. One of their first methods they jumped to was tracking people's locations. Not a chance in hell they could do that with me. I made myself comfortable in the boat. For the first time tonight, I could finally take a nice, long breath out. For the first time tonight, I could lie back without the expectation to jump back to attention at a moment's notice. For the first time tonight, I could stop playing scenario after scenario in my head. For the first time tonight, I could relax. Of course, that didn't mean I was going to relax. I probably hadn't relaxed truly and my face soured. I couldn't exactly point to a time when I could call myself truly relaxed, but that might just be a matter of semantics. Trying to define what was truly relaxing was like trying to define what was true happiness. A question for better philosophers than me. I suspected this is another one of these trouble thoughts. The ones that would just send me into another spiral. The point was lying in the darkness, the silence. I could feel content. Yeah, that was the word. Content. As far as I was concerned, it was the most admirable thing to strive for. If everyone could just find their lot in life and be content, the world would be a fine place. And because people couldn't, well, that's why I was in a job in the first place, now wasn't it? Yeah, this was nice. I'd done my job and I'd done it well. Honestly, this whole plan was a lot more elaborate than I was used to. There was a lot of ways in which it could have gone wrong. Why go through all this trouble, I wondered. Maybe I was just tired of the same standard methods. Everyone wants to try challenging themselves, try to spread their wings, show their full potential. But that wasn't it. Not really. Honestly speaking, this was a more straightforward way of achieving my optional objective than I could think of. For a question without a simple answer, this is as straightforward as I could get. Now, when the police arrived, they'd undoubtedly come to the wrong conclusion, that the killer was somebody inside the party. They might even be bold enough to make an accusation. That'd be the ideal case. However it plays out, eventually they'll figure out how misguided they are. And when the frame attempt on the gala gets revealed, the media will have a field day with it. The next step will be super easy to complete. Apparently. I never really got the grander aspects of this job. I just killed who needed to be killed. More importantly, there was nothing that could lead back to me at the scene. They wouldn't catch me for this murder. Well, if they did, it'd be for any mistakes I made this time. This would be the time that some would become panic-stricken. They'd start worriedly thinking over every step or movement they took, wondering if there were any loose ends. But I knew better. I knew I didn't leave any loose ends. By all means, it was a perfect job done perfectly. And that's why I could lay back and be content. That's why I could enjoy the silence and the darkness. Who cared if the floor I lay on was hard and dirty? Who cared if it rocked unevenly? I knew better than anyone how phony luxury was. A man can be content lying in an expensive bed or on the ground dirt. It's simply a matter of attitude. The bugs were loud, a perfect job done perfectly. Is that what I just did? By my standards, I certainly had. By every metric I judged my jobs by, I had. What was wrong? What went bad? Someone died? Isn't that sort of bad? I scowled to myself. Seriously? I'm an assassin. If someone dies, that means I did my job well. Well, that's a pretty sad job to have then. Who'd be weeping over Athen? He was, by every metric, the perfect target. Not a single friend, no family either, no one would miss him. That can't be true. There's nobody in the world who wouldn't be missed if gone. Ha! Now there's a joke. Maybe I am funny after all. Athen would miss himself. You can't miss yourself if you're dead. I ended a man's happiness. How could that not be bad? Athen deserved it. He wasn't a good man. He was a bad man. A traitor. A snake. A rat. Is that any better than my boss? What really made him playing the game any worse than anybody else? In fact, some people might call what he intended to do noble, if a skewed sort. Put aside that then, I did my research. I knew Athen's history. He'd been a sinner for a long time, so then he had to forfeit his life. Because he'd made mistakes, he wasn't entitled to live. That didn't seem right. If that's the metric to go by, I wouldn't be entitled to live. Nobody's entitled to live. Millions of people die in cruel and irrational ways every day. The only thing that stops us from keeling over at any minute is luck. What's one more death? That's faulty reasoning. Just because bad things happen in other places, that doesn't mean the bad things I did any less bad. Everybody deserves to die. Humans are evil at their core. God kills countless people with no regards to morality or utility. How then am I any different? Plenty of people curse God to the bottom of their heart. And did I really think myself as a god? I didn't. I don't think myself as a saint either. I didn't care about the morality of it all. And why was I having this conversation at all? I'm not having a conversation, I'm tormenting myself. And it wasn't healthy. Even though I tried not to, I ended up spiraling again. At least I caught myself this time before I got too deep. Nothing good can come from questioning things like that. I'd just be making myself sad. Nothing else would change. It's not like this job was making my life empty. My life was empty before I started this job. Like I usually did when I got ungrateful. I thought about my lowest point. When I'd lost the little purpose I'd had in life. When I was truly in an abyss, moving from day to day to day to day to day to day to day without the slightest bit of life in my eyes. Days where I wouldn't think a single productive thought. Days that would pass by where I didn't say a single word. Days where I didn't do a single thing in my free time. I just stewed in guilt and anger and sorrow. Pathetic. Powerless. If we're talking about people who didn't deserve to live, well, neither was there a more prime example than myself at that time. There was nothing for me, other than to question how I'd gotten to this point. But as empty of a life as I was living, I was still living. I'd had to go from day to day to day to day to day to day to day. Often I'd try to drown it all in alcohol, and while drinking alone was enticing, it required the forethought to buy beer ahead of time. That was the type of forethought I didn't tend to have back then. So many nights I'd go out to a bar. Panthea had plenty of them, not that I really ever made a choice between them. Whatever was closest. In some ways I preferred bars to drinking alone. On some level I appreciated seeing other broken people like me. It made me a bit less lonely, I guess. But there was one problem with that. You really don't want to interact with people as broken as yourself. God, that dipshit. I didn't want anything to do with him. I literally said nothing. I can't remember what got him started. The memories are too blurry. But I knew it wasn't worth anything. That guy must have been looking for a fight. Most people would have pushed back at some point. There weren't many people who would just sit there in silence, taking his drunken abuse. But I was different from most drunks. I knew patience. I knew how to tolerate abuse. I behaved in a way nobody could fault that night, when I was in the bar. When I was out of the bar? When was I out of the bar? I mean, who can fault me? How much of an arsehole do you have to be to literally follow someone out of a bar just to be a dick to them? I mean, I had absolutely nothing going on in my life, and even I thought that pretty pathetic. It was the middle of the night. There's literally nobody else around. The sad thing, I literally can't remember his face. I could tell you his hair colour, his eye colour, anything about him. I couldn't. He's a blur. There's just one thing I remember. His voice. Pathetic. I'm pretty sure there was some context to that word. Some insult attached to the front or back of it. That's the only word I remember. It's the thing that set me off. I'd forgotten just how strong I was, and I was too drunk to control myself. It was a sad story, but an incredibly common one. The amount of times this exact thing happened was honestly kind of shocking. I was just the next scumbag drunk who went too far, who forgot how fragile people were around concrete. By all means, that should have been the end of things. I took out another sigh out, then stretched out my arms, but I was lucky. That wasn't the end for me. That was the start. If it wasn't for that, I would have had a worthless life. I would have lived life powerless, sad, pathetic, and eventually dead. And look at me now. I was happy. No, not happy. Never happy, but content. Where I was now was content. Yes. Yes. Why was I questioning things like that? This was surely better than before. This is a worthwhile life. After so much reminiscing, it was clear I wouldn't be getting sleep anytime soon. So instead, I sat up in the boat and pulled out my burner phone. Seemed like now was as good a time as ever to think about my next target. I still had an optional target on the docket. Optional targets were basically low priority ones. They didn't need to die, at least not anytime soon, but they were still better off dead. They were contracts I get paid for if I chose to take them in my spare time. I didn't really care about the pay though. I just like to be thorough. If someone was better off dead, better to end them sooner than later. That was the sort of service that made me so valuable. I looked over the file, started on the optional target. It was pretty threadbare. Still, I don't think I'd have any problem with this one. She was pretty easy to find. I studied the blurry photo provided. The woman had long, dark brown hair and distinctive silver eyes. God, this picture was from a pretty bad angle. How was this the best shot we had of her? Whatever. It was enough. I'd make a meeting with her soon enough. And I'd make sure to make her another verse. Laverna. Lav. Oh shit. The investigator. I'll be meeting with you soon enough. Oh, bronze key collected. Nice. So he's going to kill the investigator that's literally investigating the crime he just committed. Hey, you. Yes, you. Ever heard of a little something called utilitarianism? Yes. I thought you might have. So, do you believe in it? As, like, a guiding philosophy? No. Really? Huh, okay. Maybe you're a step ahead of me. You see, I used to think utilitarianism was like the ideal philosophy. Not for me, of course, but in the eyes of the public, why wouldn't that just be the thing? Like, boom, philosophy solved. And yet, philosophy is notably not solved. What's up with that? Are people just dumb? And that's prolonged and easy debate this long? I wouldn't put it past humanity. But no, I've had some more time to reflect on it, and I think I've come to a different conclusion. Utilitarianism is the perfect theoretical philosophy, at least for the purposes of the public. But that's the thing, it's the perfect theoretical philosophy. And the only people who care about theoretical philosophies are philosophers. If we're looking for practical philosophies, once you can put into action, utilitarianism suddenly gets riddled with holes. See, how can you tell what's going to bring about the most good? No human can. Not really. And yeah, what's good for one might not be good for another. A genius would struggle with that, not to mention the amount of idiots that there are going around. But here's the kicker. Does the belief in utilitarianism, ironically enough, produce more bad in the world? Because as a guiding philosophy, it's a lot easier to do bad with utilitarianism. There's a kind of maximum cap on the harm a strict Kantian can do. Situations where not murdering someone is going to result in major harm do happen, but they're kind of few and far between. But a utilitarian? A utilitarian will watch the world burn with a smile on their face if they think it's for the best. Now, I'm still not coming down hard against utilitarianism. It has its pros, very obvious pros, but if we're talking in the practical sense, it certainly isn't the runaway choice. Just a little something that's been on my mind. Well, yeah, that makes sense. We need to go further into one, I think, so we can earn some chips, because we got no chips. And I really want to get back into the boat one, frankly. So let's jump into Act 2 of the boat. I assume that means that if we need this key for Act 2, this is Act 3, Act 4, and Act 5, then maybe every single one has 5 acts? That's my assumption. Venus Throw. So there I was, crawling in a vent on a ghost ship, middle of the night, masked assassin right below me. I'd take the time to retrace those steps that led me to this situation if it weren't for the fact that I was still very much in imminent danger. It was difficult to crawl through the vent with any sense of urgency, but I managed. Forwards, forwards, forwards. It was tight, and it was cramped, and it was uncomfortable, but as far as I was concerned, it was a tunnel to safety, so I took it. Extremely loud, another bullet fired through into the vent. I wasn't able to estimate how close the bullet had come to impacting me, however, from the sounds of it, it wasn't far behind. Then again, I was unclear how accurate the metric was. The sound of the gunshots echoed all around this vent extremely loudly. Whatever, let's just say the gunshots were right on my ass. Probably a safer assumption to make. Keep scooting, keep scooting. To what end, I wasn't sure. Didn't have time to consider those thoughts. Just had to keep moving forwards in a forwards direction best I could. Another gunshot. Fuck. Thane could run faster than I could crawl. And thanks to the noise I was making, it was clear where I was at any given time. What initially seemed to be a saving grace is looking less and less like a viable option of escape. If things stayed the course, I'd have a bullet in me no time flat. And once that happened, I'd be dead. Think. There were very few situations in life that couldn't be solved through being clever enough, and this wasn't one of them. The odds were, to perhaps a comical level, stacked against me. 99 times out of 100 I would die on this boat. But if there was one thing I hated in life, it was treating something within your grasp as impossible. I had outs right now. The question was if I was able to find them or not. So, to the task at hand. What was the core problem? Thane was faster than me. Thane knew where I was. Thane wanted to shoot me with his gun. Those three things combined spelled bad news pretty clearly. To survive, I'd have to topple one of those tenants. Given this current situation, convincing Thane not to shoot me with a gun, especially from up in this vent, seemed unlikely. I also didn't know any prone vent moving strats that ruled that option out. What I was left with was stopping Thane from knowing where I was. He only knew where I was because I was making a lot of noise, so time to stop that. I didn't have great hopes with the plan. I just concocted, but it was the best I could come up with in the few seconds since the last shot. As quickly as I could without interrupting my momentum, I took off my shoes. Then with a ton of force, I tossed it ahead. I bounced along the vent walls, making a ton of noise. For my part, I stopped in my tracks. In fact, I began to very slowly, very faintly move forwards. The shoe only bounced and made noise a few seconds before it stopped. And then, silence. Thane had no idea where I was at that point. If I stayed silent, it would stay that way. And like I'd realised earlier, I had a limited number of bullets on him. If he just wanted to go crazy shooting up the whole vent searching for me, that'd be a hard task. So then was I safe? I got my answer in the form of a bullet breaking through the vent. Except it was far, far down the vent. There was a bunch of distance between myself and that gunshot. Huh? How badly had Thane judged my positioning? Quite severely it seemed. Still, that seemed too far to be a reasonable shot. Another bullet shot through the vent, a second or two later, just a bit closer than the last. Huh? It's getting really confused now. He's working his way down the vent. What was Thane's play here? When another shot was fired, an equal amount of time between the shots as last time, an equal amount of space closer, I got the drift. Oh fuck. Thane didn't think I'd made it that far. He was just defining an outer bounds, the farthest I could possibly be. And I'd slowly, methodically walk forwards, firing every other second, until he came to where I hid. I'd be struck even if it was just glanced. I'd make a noise, and then I'd be fucked. The vent wasn't big enough to try and dodge the bullet. So what to do? My instinct was to turn around and start running in that direction. But there were a bunch of problems with that idea. For one, turning fully around this vent would likely pose a larger problem than I expected. More importantly, running the other direction put me in the same position as before. Except this time it'd be even worse. See, going forwards, it wasn't far until a turn in the vent. That turn represented, as far as I was aware, a turn past a wall, a place where Thane couldn't directly follow. I don't know how well Thane knew the architecture of the ship, but regardless, keeping up with me once the vent was going across walls would be incredibly difficult. On the other hand, behind me was a straight shot for a long time. Enough time for Thane to catch up and put a bullet through my chest. But what other option did I have? The bullet came up with very little time apart, very little distance apart. He definitely hit me at this rate. Definitely. Jesus Christ, this was terrifying. I could feel the sweat on my forehead start to pile up. I needed to make sure it didn't hit the bottom of the vent and give me away. What was truly frightening was how robotic the process was, how robotic Thane was. I kept calling him a demon, but the cyborg comparison felt more apt. He was precise, and he was deadly. Same time between each shot, same distance between each shot, like he was on a program. Wait a second. That was it. The mechanical nature of his, it wasn't thoroughness, it was weakness. It made him painfully predictable. And I could deal with predictable. The timing on this was going to be incredibly tight. Move forward without making any noise in between the shots. Like insanely tight. Ordinarily too tight to count on, but my senses were heightened. And it was do or die. My only way out was through. Literally. So then measure the time, measure the distance. This is all happening too quick to actually try measuring those things out with actual numbers or anything. I just have to feel it in my gut. Have a feel for it. That last bullet was close. Really close. Not much time left before it was time to go. Okay, running position. Scooch a little forward. Next bullet. Right as I hit the bullet, I pushed forward. As the bullet was breaking through the vent, I was moving towards it. When I hit the top of the vent, my head was already under it. My feet were pushing forward as fast as I could, practically running sideways. Push along the vent with my arms, with my legs. Forwards, forwards, forwards. Clearly, I had caught Thane unawares. It took him a second to react to the sudden noise, and because of that, he was a bit too slow on the draw. Faster, faster, keep running. I came upon my shoe, and I just scooped it up and with one of my hands and kept going. Honestly, my instinct was just to abandon it and solely focus on moving forward. But I couldn't completely abandon the bigger picture. Being without a shoe would likely cost me greatly further along in the line, and I planned on making it further along the line. Up ahead, the vent turned left. Right behind me, Thane was still letting off a volley of shots. How many bullets does this guy have? Has he got a fucking belt of bullets? But none of them were connecting. I stayed with the vent, moving left while maintaining as much of my momentum as I could manage. In theory, this moved me away from where Thane could reach. But I didn't feel like letting up. I kept moving and moving, no idea where I was in relation to anything. The only thing I could tell was that there were no more gunshots being fired. A bit further ahead, the vent turned to the right. Without much choice, I continued in that direction. Faster, faster. Is that another loose grating? That thought crossed my mind right as I came up to it. Probably would have been better to acknowledge that sooner. Before I even knew what was happening, I felt my center of mass begin to fall. Fuck! With a loud clattering, the great knife fell to the ground, and right above it, so too did I. That wasn't good. Instantly I looked around to ascertain my surroundings. I was in a small empty room. And with that, if we're gonna wrap this one up here, I'm excited to get back into the boat one though. This is an exciting one. I like it. But I'm kind of interested to get back into Laverna's one and the Assassin's one now to see how they intermingle and what's going to happen there. But we'll finish this one up in the next one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for getting out with me, and I'll see you in the next one.